I'm joined by Senator Jack Reed, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee. Senator, what about this strike? We're told, and we're reading in the New York Times, that General Campbell, after his testimony yesterday, has privately said that none of the terms of engagement, none of the rules guiding, operating the special forces who were on the ground were met in this case.
General Campbell assured us that he's going to conduct a vigorous investigation. He already has a brigadier general on the ground conducting the investigation. He will inform us. It will be transparent. And I'm sure if there were violations of the rules of engagement, he will hold the appropriate people responsible. We operationally understand that collateral damage in any way, shape, or form doesn't help us. But more importantly, we know that we have to respect these, not just hospitals, but we have to respect the civilian population. Otherwise, we won't be effective in what we're trying to do to aid the government of Afghanistan.
But in this case, it just seems so clear that there needs to be some sort of independent investigation, that the world is not going to believe a Pentagon that had three different stories in the first couple of days. First saying that it was Taliban firing at coalition forces from inside the hospital, which Doctors Without Borders vigorously denied from Saturday morning on, and then saying, well, the Afghans asked for it. Why would they trust a Pentagon investigation at this stage? Don't we need an independent international investigation?
The investigation is going to have to be thorough. It's going to be unflinching. It's going to have to look at what was done, who did it. And I think it's the quality of the investigation and also the ability, and I think General Campbell is positioned to do this, to communicate truthfully and directly that they've looked at every aspect, they've held people accountable if it's necessary, but clearly this is something that cannot be ignored or sort of dismissed, and I think General Campbell is doing everything he can to get the facts out, and that's ultimately the test, and then take responsible action based on those facts.
Now, let me ask you about Russia in Syria and over the skies and what they've been doing, and also now, for the first time, firing cruise missiles from warships. They say that they're going after ISIS targets, but Ash Carter said in Rome today they are not, no matter what they say. And now there's a new report that we're just hearing about on Fox, and maybe you have heard it as well, that 3 times in the last week since they started this air campaign, the Russians have intercepted American Predator drones over Syria. What can you tell us about that?
Well, first, it appears that the Russians are engaged in trying to support the Assad regime, not directly go after and exclusively go after ISIL. They're not cooperating with the coalition of 60 nations, including the United States, that are going after ISIL, which is a major threat to the peace and security of the world. That their intent, the Russian intent, is to prop up a regime which they've been supporting for decades now, and they're doing it, it appears, in closer collaboration with Assad's forces on the ground. One aspect of this is I think they were compelled to do this because Assad had been losing ground steadily, the rebels had been gaining, and the Russians felt that they had to step in now in order to prevent a worse fate for Assad. This is not a positive development. I think it complicates the matter. It creates more violence in Syria, and it deters or delays ultimately what has to be a political solution, and the whole community, with the exception of the world community, with the exception of Russia, are calling for Assad's departure, and that, I think, is ultimately the way this should end and must end.
How concerned are you that U.S. and Russian warplanes, or even now a Predator drone, may come into conflict in this airspace?
This is one of the issues that I think the Secretary has been trying to discuss seriously with the Russians, which is deconfliction. They should appreciate the fact that unintentional contact could lead to serious consequences, and it's in their interest as well as, I think, our interest to ensure that we can fly where we need to go, and we will not be interfered with by the Russians, and that's something that we have to insist upon. The first step is to sit down and talk about the rules, really, of the road, or in this case, the sky, and it's important to do that.
And what do you think Putin is up to, really? Just propping up Assad? Does he have larger ambitions?
I think this is one where he feels that if Assad would fall, their position in the Middle East would seriously erode. They've had a naval base in Syria for decades. They've had a continuous support not only of this Assad, but his father before him. So they feel a vested interest in there. And also, I think Putin has this sense that regime change any place could ultimately be a threat to his position because it destabilizes. He has forces within Russia that might, if in the proper circumstances, begin to agitate against him. I don't think on a military basis, but on a political basis initially. So I think one, it's just to maintain their long-term relationship and maintain Assad in power, and two, it's just this notion of trying to stop regime change anywhere.
Jack Reed, thank you, Senator. Thank you very much.
Andrea.